Here's the thing about the Dukes of Hazzard. Millions of Americans watched it every single Friday night. They knew the car. They knew the theme song. They knew the shorts. But almost none of them knew what was actually happening behind the camera. And the real story is wilder, stranger, and more fascinating than anything that ever aired on screen. We're talking about a show that was never supposed to last more than 9 episodes, built on a car they were destroying faster than they could find replacements, starring 2 guys who would eventually walk off the set in the middle of a season. And yet somehow, against every possible odd, it became one of the most watched television series in American history. Today, we're going deep. 12 secrets that have been hiding in plain sight since 1979. And if you think you already know this show, I promise you, you don't know all of this. Let's start the countdown. 12. The show that was never supposed to exist. January 26, 1979, a Friday night. CBS puts a new show in its lineup, not because they believed in it, not because some executive had a vision for it, but because they needed something to fill a gap. The Incredible Hulk was going on a brief hiatus, and the network needed a warm body to occupy that primetime slot. So they ordered 9 episodes of a quirky little Southern comedy about 2 cousins, a corrupt small-town sheriff, and a very fast orange car. 9 episodes. That was it. No expectation of renewal, no grand plan. CBS chairman William Paley, the man who had built the network from a radio station into one of the big 3 broadcast giants, the man who had signed Norman Lear and Lucille Ball, reportedly never quite bought into the idea of Southern fried comedy driving his primetime ratings. He was wrong. Spectacularly, historically wrong. Within weeks of its debut, the Dukes of Hazzard wasn't just surviving, it was climbing. Within its first full season, it ranked 2nd in all of American television, trailing only Dallas, which happened to air immediately after it on the same network on the same night. 2 shows back-to-back on CBS on Friday nights, and together, they were basically unstoppable. What started as a 9-episode filler ran for 7 seasons and 147 episodes. It spawned an animated series, a toy empire, and a merchandising bonanza that reportedly generated over $190 million in a single year alone, all from a show nobody expected to survive the month. That's the thing about underdogs. Nobody ever writes them into the plan. 11. The audition that was one giant lie. If you want to understand how the Dukes of Hazzard actually got made, you need to understand the audition that landed its most important cast member. And the audition was, by any honest measure, a masterpiece of creative fiction. John Schneider walked into the room to read for the role of Bo Duke in 1979. He was 18 years old. The producers had specified they wanted someone between 24 and 30. Schneider was a native New Yorker with none of the Southern background the character demanded. On paper, he was completely wrong for the part. So he walked in wearing a cowboy hat, drinking a beer, and chewing tobacco. He put on a Southern drawl thick enough to spread on biscuits. He was, in every possible way, performing a character before the audition even began. Then came the detail that truly sealed it. Schneider told the producers he was a graduate of the Georgia School of High Performance Driving, a credential that would obviously set him apart for a role centered on stunt driving in a muscle car. The producers were impressed. There was only one problem. That school didn't exist. Schneider had invented it on the spot. But they bought it, Schneider later told Fox News, with the kind of grin that tells you he still can't quite believe it worked. Here's the remarkable twist. He wasn't entirely bluffing. Schneider actually had natural talent behind the wheel. Once on set, he could slide the General Lee around corners and handle the car with genuine skill. He couldn't do the big jump sequences. Insurance wouldn't allow it. But by most accounts from the production, he wasn't far off from being able to. He got the part. He became Bo Duke, and a fictional driving school that existed only in the mind of a teenager from New York became part of television history. The lesson there is almost uncomfortably motivating. Sometimes the audacity to show up fully committed to a version of yourself, even one that's slightly ahead of reality, is exactly what the moment requires. 10. The bathroom that built a chemistry. John Schneider had the role of Bo. Now the show needed a Luke. And the way Tom Wopat got cast is one of those stories that sounds too perfect to be real, except it genuinely happened, and the people involved have confirmed it many times over. Wopat was a stage actor. He flew in for a screen test. Schneider happened to be in the production building bathroom when Wopat walked in after him. Through the stall door, Schneider spotted a guitar case. He struck up a conversation about music. The two of them just started talking, naturally, easily, the way people do when they don't realize they're auditioning each other. They came out, did a scene together, and Wopat was hired immediately. What the producers saw in that screen test was something you genuinely cannot manufacture. Two people who simply liked each other. Not performed chemistry. Not two actors trying hard to seem comfortable together. Just two guys who had found a wavelength in a men's room and carried it straight onto the set. That ease, that genuine brotherly quality between Bo and Luke became the emotional core of a show built around car chases and comedy. Without it, the stunts would have just been stunts. With it, viewers actually cared whether the Duke boys made it out of the next jam. A guitar under a bathroom stall. That's where it started. 9. Daisy's shorts almost didn't make it on screen. In 1979, Catherine Bach sat in a wardrobe department and was handed the costumes the show's producers had prepared for the character of Daisy Duke. She looked at them. She was not impressed. The shorts they'd prepared were fine, safe, standard television issue. But Bach had a different vision for who Daisy was. According to her account in a 1996 interview on E! True Hollywood Story, she went home and made her own costumes herself, including those cut-off denim shorts that would go on to define an entire fashion era. "She's a lot of Dolly Parton, and she's a lot of me when I was a waitress," Bach explained in 1979. "She is independent, she is physical, and she can do anything the guys can do." That framing matters enormously, because the easy reading of Daisy Duke is that she was the show's eye candy. The deeper reality is that Bach was actively constructing a character, physically, stylistically, attitudinally. She saw Daisy as a capable, autonomous woman who happened to exist in a world of fast cars and small-town politics. The shorts she sewed at home became so culturally powerful that within a few years, any denim cutoffs worn short enough were simply called Daisy Dukes, a generic product category named after a television character born from a wardrobe dispute in a production office in 1979. The Daisy Duke poster Bach posed for during the show's run sold 5 million copies. 5 million, admired reportedly by everyone from ordinary viewers to First Lady Nancy Reagan and staff at the White House. Bach had sent one to a former teacher of hers who worked there. She made those shorts herself. Never forget that. 8. The voice that was always there but never seen. Imagine being the most recognizable voice on one of the most watched shows in America, and for 6 full seasons, nobody who watched ever once saw your face. That was Waylon Jennings. Every episode of the Dukes of Hazzard opened with his voice. Every commercial break cliffhanger was punctuated by his drawl. He narrated the entire emotional landscape of Hazzard County for millions of viewers across America. He was, in the truest sense, the storyteller of the show. But here's what most people don't know. Jennings wasn't brought in fresh for the television series. He'd already been the narrator of Moonrunners, the 1975 film from which Dukes of Hazzard was directly developed, about 2 cousins running bootleg liquor with their Uncle Jesse. When CBS approached writer and director Guy Waldron to develop the concept into a TV series, Waldron kept the same storytelling DNA from the film, including bringing Jennings back as the balladeer. Jennings then wrote and recorded Good Ol' Boys as the theme. When the song was released commercially in 1980, it reached #1 on the Hot Country Singles chart and number 21 on the Billboard Hot 100, his highest charting pop single of his entire career, and reportedly his first million seller. A television theme song becoming a genuine country music hit. That almost never happens. But Jennings couldn't resist one small dig in his commercial version. He added a lyric referencing the fact that the show only ever showed his hands and guitar on camera, his own quiet commentary on his invisible status. After 6 seasons of fan mail demanding to see the balladeer in person, producers finally relented. In the 7th and final season, Jennings appeared on screen in an episode titled, "With No Subtlety Whatsoever, Welcome Waylon Jennings." The man who had narrated 120 episodes finally walked into Hazzard County in the flesh. Some presences are more powerful when they're just a voice. But even legends deserve to be seen eventually. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of television's most fascinating stories, go ahead and subscribe. We cover the shows, the cars, and the history that shaped American culture. And there's a lot more where this came from. 7. The 300-car graveyard nobody talks about. Here is a number that should genuinely stop you cold. Somewhere between 230 and 330 1969 Dodge Chargers were destroyed, making the Dukes of Hazzard. Not damaged, not repaired, destroyed. John Schneider himself, in a later interview, offered his conservative personal estimate at 329 vehicles, arrived at by calculating roughly 2 cars per episode across 150 shows, with a little room for error. 2 cars per episode. Think about that for a moment. Every week that a new episode aired, 2 classic American muscle cars ceased to exist. The problem was physics. The General Lee's signature jump sequences, the ones that made the show iconic, the ones that drew viewers back every week, were genuinely destructive. When a car hits a jump ramp and becomes airborne, the damage begins before it even lands. The frame starts to flex. Then comes the landing. And as Schneider described it years later, the radiator gets pushed back, the fan comes through it, the engine mounts tear free. There was no version of that stunt where the car walked away undamaged. In the early episodes, the production team would simply drive to nearby used car lots and buy replacement Chargers. They went through every available 1969 Charger in the region within the first season. Eventually, the studio built a dedicated workshop specifically to source, prepare, and convert vehicles, including 1968 and 1970 Chargers, modified to pass as the 1969 model on screen. Piper Cubs were reportedly hired to fly over the countryside, searching for Chargers in private driveways and farm fields. By the later seasons, genuine 1969 Chargers had become so scarce and so expensive, the classic car collector market was heating up simultaneously, that the production was forced to use miniature radio-controlled models for certain jump shots. The actors hated it, directors hated it, viewers noticed. Many believe the quality drop in those final seasons was directly connected to the moment the show stopped using real cars. When production finally wrapped, 18 General Lees were left on the CBS lot. They sat for 5 years. Then they were sold to private collectors. Today, an original hero car, one of the cars actually used for close-up footage rather than jumps, is considered a serious collector's piece. One sold to professional golfer Bubba Watson in the early 2000s for well over $100,000. 300 cars destroyed. 18 survived. That's what it cost to make it look easy. 6. The hood slide was an accident. Of all the visual signatures of the Dukes of Hazzard, the jump, the horn-playing Dixie, the orange paint, perhaps none is more imitated than the hood slide. Bo and Luke, leaping across the hood of the General Lee in one fluid motion rather than using the door. It became one of the defining images of the show. Tom Wopat has spoken about where it actually came from. The first time it happened, it wasn't choreographed. His foot caught awkwardly on the side of the car while he was trying to make a quick exit. He ended up sliding across the hood and, in the process, cut his thigh on the radio antenna. The camera was rolling. It looked incredible. And just like that, an accident became a tradition. What's remarkable is that nobody stopped the scene, rewound, and said, "Let's do that again properly." The director saw it, recognized it for what it was, and kept it in. That instinct, to trust the unexpected moment rather than override it, is rarer in television production than most people realize, especially on a show moving at the pace of 20-plus episodes a year. That creative accidental quality was actually woven into the DNA of the show in ways people don't always appreciate. The hood slide was improvised. The chemistry between Schneider and Wopat was discovered in a bathroom, not scripted. Catherine Bach's costume choices were made at home, not in a design meeting. Again and again, the most memorable elements of the show emerged not from careful planning, but from people in the moment making instinctive choices. And once those choices landed, the production was smart enough to codify them, to make the accident the rule going forward. There's something in that worth sitting with. The things that endure in popular culture are rarely the things most carefully engineered. They're usually the accidents that someone was present enough to recognize. The hood slide became so embedded in American visual culture that decades later, people who have never seen a single episode of the Dukes of Hazzard still know exactly what it looks like. That's not the result of a focus group. That's what happens when a real human moment gets captured on film and left alone. 5. The salary revolt that almost killed the show. By 1982, the Dukes of Hazzard was a commercial machine unlike almost anything else on television. Merchandising revenue from the show, toys, lunchboxes, model cars, clothing, posters, reportedly exceeded $190 million in 1981 alone. Not the show's production revenue. Merchandise. Tom Wopat and John Schneider were the faces of that empire. They were on every product. Their images were generating a staggering fortune, and they were not receiving a penny of it beyond their acting salaries. They asked for a cut of the merchandising revenue. The studio said no. So at the start of season 5, the two leads walked off the show entirely. Warner Brothers scrambled. They replaced Bo and Luke with two new Duke cousins, Coy Duke, played by Byron Cherry, and Vance Duke, played by Christopher Mayer. The explanation given to viewers was that Bo and Luke had left Hazzard County to pursue professional NASCAR careers, which was at least somewhat in character. It didn't work. Fans were furious. Ratings dropped immediately and significantly. The replacement cousins were not beloved, to put it gently. To compensate for the loss of audience interest, the production reportedly ramped up the stunt work dramatically. Nearly 36 Chargers were destroyed in that 18-episode period alone, almost double the normal rate. Eventually, Wopat and Schneider came back, reportedly reaching an agreement that included some form of compensation on the merchandising front. The moment they returned, the ratings recovered. The studio had tried to prove that the show was bigger than any individual actors. The audience spent 18 episodes proving that it wasn't. 4. Boss Hogg had a contract clause. Nobody expected Sorrel Book played J.D. Boss Hogg, the corpulent, scheming, white-suited villain of Hazzard County, across all 147 episodes of the show. It's one of television's great comic villain performances, pompous, greedy, perpetually outmaneuvered, and somehow always ready to scheme again by the following week. What very few people knew at the time was the contractual protection built around that character. Book's contract apparently contained a specific clause stipulating that Boss Hogg could never be involved in storylines featuring drug dealing or murder. On the surface, that might sound like a standard network content restriction, but the reasoning behind it was actually quite deliberate and speaks to something important about how the show understood its own audience. The Dukes of Hazzard was fundamentally a family show. Boss Hogg was supposed to be a villain your children could laugh at. Corrupt, yes, but in a bumbling, small-stakes way. Land deals, speed traps, petty fraud. The moment he crossed into genuine violent crime, the entire tone of the character, and potentially the entire tone of the show, would shift into something darker and less appropriate for its audience. There's a similar story attached to Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane. James Best, who played Roscoe, reportedly made a deliberate choice as the series evolved to shift the character away from genuine menace and toward pure comedy. He didn't want children growing up with an image of law enforcement as corrupt and threatening. He wanted to play the fool rather than the tyrant. In a show often dismissed as mindless entertainment, those were remarkably thoughtful decisions about the relationship between storytelling and the audience watching it. 3. The show that was filmed in one state and set in another. Here is a detail that devoted fans of the show eventually noticed, and casual viewers almost certainly never did. The Dukes of Hazzard is set in Hazzard County, Georgia. It was never filmed there, at least not for more than the first 5 episodes. The original pilot episodes were shot on location in Georgia, but the production quickly moved to Warner Brothers sound stages and backlot in Burbank, California, where it remained for the rest of the series. California standing in for rural Georgia, episode after episode, for 7 years. And the further into the series it went, the more visible the geographical inconsistency became. The plant life in later seasons doesn't grow in the American South. The terrain doesn't match. Viewers with sharp eyes and any knowledge of southern landscapes could tell they were watching Southern California dressed up in a Georgia costume. The car continuity issues were equally remarkable, documented in exhaustive detail by attentive fans. In pursuit scenes, the make and model of Sheriff Roscoe's patrol cars would change shot to shot. Stock footage of the General Lee would show Bo driving when the story called for Luke at the wheel. Some scenes used footage that had clearly been filmed seasons earlier and didn't match the current episode's context at all. These are not criticisms, they're a window into the reality of weekly television production in the early 1980s. A show producing 20-plus episodes a year on a tight schedule, destroying 2 cars a week, shooting car chases on a backlot in California while pretending to be in Georgia. The fact that it worked as well as it did for as long as it did is arguably more impressive once you understand the constraints it was working within. 2. The animated spin-off Nobody Remembers and Why It Failed. In 1983, with the live-action series at the height of its cultural reach, Warner Brothers made a decision that seemed logical on paper: turn the Dukes of Hazzard into a cartoon. They handed the production to Hanna-Barbera, the studio behind the Flintstones and Scooby-Doo, and ordered an animated series simply titled The Dukes. The animated version took an interesting creative leap. Freed from the constraints of a Burbank backlot pretending to be Georgia, the cartoon sent Bo, Luke, Daisy, and Uncle Jesse on international adventures, racing Boss Hogg through Greece, chasing schemes through Hong Kong, globe-trotting in a way the live-action show could never afford. It lasted 20 episodes. There's a certain irony in why it failed. The live-action show had always, in some ways, operated like a cartoon. Improbable stunts, physics-defying car jumps, villains who never quite managed to win. When you actually made it a cartoon, something essential evaporated. The charm of the real show wasn't just the adventures. It was the real car, the real dust, the real weight of an orange Charger leaving the ground at speed, and the genuine knowledge, even if viewers didn't consciously articulate it, that someone had to actually do that. Animation removed the one thing that made the absurdity feel grounded: physical consequence. Sometimes the magic of something isn't the story itself. It's the specific, irreducible reality of how the story is being told. 1. The legacy that outlived the controversy. And here we arrive at the entry that no honest accounting of the Dukes of Hazzard can avoid. Because this show's legacy is genuinely complicated. And that complexity is part of what makes it worth examining seriously. The Confederate battle flag on the roof of the General Lee. When the show originally aired, it was treated as set dressing, a visual shorthand for Southern identity, rebelliousness, and a certain kind of rural American mythology. For the largely white, rural, and suburban audiences who made the show a ratings phenomenon, it read as nostalgic iconography. For many other Americans, it carried an entirely different weight. For most of the show's original run and for decades afterward, this tension existed largely beneath the surface of mainstream conversation. Then in 2015, in the aftermath of a horrific act of racially motivated violence in South Carolina, Governor Nikki Haley spoke out against the display of the Confederate flag in public life. Warner Brothers announced they would stop licensing Dukes of Hazzard merchandise, featuring the original roof design. John Schneider publicly disagreed with the decision. Others in the cast had more nuanced responses. The debate that followed was genuine and unresolved, because it was about something genuinely complex, the question of what popular culture carries with it, and who gets to decide what it means. But here is what remains undeniable. The Dukes of Hazzard, in its time, did something specific and real. It made rural America feel visible on primetime television at a moment when the dominant cultural conversation was urban. It gave audiences a show where the heroes were working class, where family loyalty mattered more than money, where the powerful got outwitted by the resourceful. It was fundamentally optimistic about ordinary people, their ingenuity, their decency, their ability to find joy in circumstances that weren't particularly glamorous. That quality, the genuine warmth at the center of the show, is why it ran for 7 seasons. It's why the merchandise sold in the hundreds of millions. It's why Waylon Jennings' theme song still lands differently than almost any other television theme of its era. Just good old boys wouldn't change if they could, fighting the system like a true modern-day Robin Hood. That line meant something to people. It still does. The show is complicated. Its legacy requires honesty. But its impact on American television, on what ordinary people felt they were allowed to see themselves as on a Friday night in 1979, was real. And it was lasting. And that's the story of the Dukes of Hazzard, a show born from a 9-episode gamble that nobody believed in, built on a car they couldn't stop destroying, given its voice by a country legend nobody ever saw on screen, and driven by 2 guys whose chemistry was discovered in a men's room in Los Angeles. 12 secrets, 1 show, and an era of American television that still hasn't quite been replicated. What's the one thing from this list that genuinely surprised you? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if this kind of deep dive is what you're looking for, the real stories behind the shows, the cars, and the moments that shaped American culture, subscribe. There's a lot more road ahead.